Now that you've planned your cross-country, you're ready to file the flight plan. Did we hear you say, "Oh goody, more government paperwork"? Folks, don't be negative. You probably weren't raised that way. But you may ask, why should I file a flight plan if it's not required for VFR flights? Can you say cheap insurance policy? Cheap because all it costs is the time it takes you to write it down and give it to a flight service station. And what kind of insurance do you get? A guarantee that someone will be looking for you if you don't make it to your destination. Basically, that's the purpose of a VFR flight plan, to alert the search and rescue folks if you don't arrive at your destination on time. So, here's what the standard FAA flight plan form looks like. And if you were to walk into a flight service station, it's the one you'd fill out. Of course, most people don't actually go to the flight service station. They file their flight plan on a computer with the FAA's DUAT weather briefing system, or they file over the telephone or on the radio. But the radio should be your last choice because that would tie up the frequency for quite a while. If you're not filing your flight plan in person, no one cares what form you use, but you do want to give them the information in the same order. The flight service station specialist will type it in at a computer terminal, and it's much quicker to give him or her the items in order. So where do you dig out all this information? Well, almost everything you'll need for your flight plan comes from your flight log. Remember, we talked about this earlier. And there's even a flight plan form on the back of most flight log forms. So let's fill out a flight plan using this log for a cross-country from Richfield Airport to Mount Pleasant Airport. Now, the first block designates what type of flight this will be. As we zoom in, you see VFR and IFR, and they're pretty much self-explanatory. But what's this DVFR stuff? Well, it stands for Defense VFR. You'd use DVFR if you were crossing one of the Coastal or Domestic Air Defense Identification Zones, ADIZ, or the Distant Early Warning Identification Zone, DWIZ, while leaving or returning to the United States. Those are areas where, for national security purposes, the military wants to know the identification and location and be able to control every aircraft there. So, with a few exceptions, if you don't file a DVFR flight plan when penetrating the ADIZ and don't make the appropriate reports in these areas, you will probably get the company of a military jet escort for the rest of your trip. And those guys are not real pleasant sometimes. Since you're not going to be flying any foreign trips just yet, let's make this a VFR flight plan. Check-a-rooney right there. Now, box 2 requests your aircraft identification. So enter your complete aircraft identification, including the prefix N. In this case, November 359er Echo Sierra. This, of course, is the same number that's written on the side or tail of your aircraft. Next, in block 3, enter your aircraft type and special equipment code. You probably know by now that your Skyhawk's aircraft type is a Charlie Echo 172. Now, special equipment is a letter code that tells ATC what navigation and transponder equipment you have on board. The AIM has a table titled Aircraft Equipment Suffixes, which lists these codes. Pilots usually learn the code for their own airplane and may have to look up the others. Now, Skyhawk November 359er Echo Sierra is equipped with a GPS receiver. So looking at the table, you use, let's see if we can find it here. There it is, Global Positioning System, GPS. You would use the code SLANT Gulf, following the aircraft type. Now we have a Charlie Echo 172 Slant Gulf. If one of these pieces of special equipment were inoperative, you'd need to use a different suffix here. Now let's move on to block 4. Enter the true airspeed in knots. Since ATC uses knots as their standard measure of airspeed, you should too. In this example, we've checked the Skyhawk's pilot information manual and found that 110 knots would be appropriate for 65% cruise at our planned altitude. So we'll put 110 knots in here. Next, in Block 5, enter the departure airport identifier code. In our example, it's RIF. Not for reading is fundamental, it's for Richfield Airport. Now, Block 6 is actually 2 blocks. The first one is for the time you expect to take off, so that's what you give when you're filing your flight plan. And of course, it's in Zulu time. You see the little Z right there. And the right side is filled in at the flight service station after you call and tell them your actual takeoff time. But if you weren't able to call a flight service station on the radio after you're airborne, you could tell the flight service station that you're sure that you will take off at the proposed time, and they will enter that as an assumed departure time. For our purposes today, put 1400 in the proposed block since we want to depart at 0700 and the conversion to Zulu is +7 in this example. It's not always +7. In Block 7, enter your initial VFR cruising altitude, which comes from the first planned cruising altitude on your navigation log. In our example, we will use 9500 or 9500. Now, Block 8 requests your route of flight. You enter every significant point on your route, especially those where your course changes. Remember our flight log, we put them in there. And the FAA wants you to define those by referencing them to nearby radio navigation aids. You'll learn about those later. You can also use airport identifier codes. And on our flight, we go right over 2 airports, so we'll enter the codes for them. 44 uniform for Salina Gunnison and 41 uniform for Manti Ephraim. So we'll put them in right here. In Block 9, enter the destination airport identifier code, 43 uniform for Mount Pleasant. Block 10 contains your estimated time en route in hours and minutes, which comes from the total in your flight log's ETE column. In this case, it's 0 hours and 39 minutes. And make sure that you change the minutes to hours and minutes. For example, if your total ETE, estimated time en route, were 120 minutes, you'd enter it as 2 hours and 0 minutes. Be careful. Make sure you don't say 1 hour and 20 minutes for 120 minutes. That's a common mistake, especially for a bonehead like me. Block 11 is reserved for remarks pertinent to ATC or the clarification of other flight plan info. Personal items like, "I'm depressed and lonely and nobody likes me," while in my case they may be true, are not pertinent for Block 11. Now let's drop down to the next line. In Block 12 here, you enter your usable fuel on board in hours and minutes. To get this number, first subtract what you would use in the climb from your total usable on board, and then divide that difference by your fuel flow in gallons per hour at cruise airspeed. In our example, we said that our total usable fuel was 30 gallons, and the climb will take 3.4 gallons and 13 minutes. Well, that leaves 26.6 gallons, and with our fuel flow of 7.3 gallons per hour, and we get out our trusty flight computer and calculate, our fuel on board is about 3 hours and 39 minutes, plus the 13 minutes for the climb, or 3 hours and 52 minutes. In Block 13, you're asked to specify your alternate airport. Now, since this is a VFR flight plan, an alternate airport is not required. However, listing an alternate airport is a good idea. It tells the flight service station your pre-flight intentions, and if you couldn't land at your destination and were unable to communicate with them, they would know what you're intending to do. In Block 14, you're asked to enter your name, address, telephone number, and your aircraft home base. Enter enough information so that flight service can easily locate someone knowledgeable about the airplane and the flight. In Block 15, enter the total number of persons on board, including crew. By the way, this used to be souls on board, and they changed it, I guess, when they realized that I was counting the bottoms of everyone's shoes on the aircraft. Block 16 is simple enough. They want the color of your aircraft, the predominant colors. Well, November 359er Echo Sierra is white with gray, red, and blue trim, so that's what we'll enter in Block 16. And the last block. In there, you write the name of the flight service station you will call to close your flight plan. And usually when you file your flight plan, they will give you the name of that FSS. Another good idea is to give the flight service station a destination telephone number. This will allow the search and rescue folks to contact you should you forget to close your flight plan within 1/2 hour after your estimated time of arrival. You know, most searches begin and end with one phone call to the number listed. And now, you've got everything you need to make that call to the flight service station. Okay, you've made the call and filed your flight plan. Good job. Now what? Well, there are a bunch of reasons why you might not be able to take off at your estimated departure time. So the flight service station won't activate your flight plan until they know that you're actually in the air. You call them when you're airborne on the frequency for the nearest flight service facility to your departure airport. As you can see, Ridgefield Airport has a remote communications outlet for the Cedar City Flight Service Station on 122.5. What you want to tell them is that you're on a VFR flight plan, your departure and destination airports, and your takeoff time. That way, they'll know your ETA at your destination. And when you land, be sure to close your flight plan by calling on the radio, picking up a phone, or using DUAT. It's important that you do this within a 1/2 hour of your scheduled arrival time. If you don't, the search and rescue folks will start trying to locate you. Now, it's quite possible that you had a greater than forecast headwind, or maybe you decided to sightsee a little more than you expected to. Whatever the case, if you see that you might not get to your destination within a 1/2 hour of your scheduled arrival time, give the FSS a call on the radio and let them know that you're running late. That way, the search and rescue folks won't be spending their time looking for you when you haven't even landed yet. And just so you know, when you land at a tower-controlled field, don't assume that your flight plan will be closed. It's ultimately your responsibility to make sure it is closed. And now, you know all there is to know about VFR flight plans, the cheapest flight insurance you will ever buy.